Hi, everybody. My name is Brian Pitts. I'm the Assistant Director at the Latin American Institute here at UCLA. I want to welcome you to our talk today, Me Duele Rio, Enfleshing Territory, Body Mapping, and the Affective Geographies of Chinese Infrastructure in Bolivia's Amazon. This is part of a lecture series that we're doing throughout the entire course of this academic year, covering a couple of countries that don't get a lot of attention sometimes in Latin American studies. I'm here in LA because there's not like a large Bolivian or Paraguayan community here. But also just in general, Bolivia and Paraguay are often forgotten, right? Being sort of landlocked in the middle of South America, lower populations in a lot of countries around there. And, for those of us here in the United States, a little bit less prominent in U.S.-Latin America relations throughout most of their history, although not always. And so this year we put the focus on those two countries. Today's talk is going to be given by one of our very own, Duele Guzman, who is a fifth-year PhD candidate in geography here at UCLA. She holds a master's degree in Latin American Studies from the University of Texas at Austin, and her research has been supported by the Mellon ACLS Dissertation Innovation Fellowship, the UCLA Luskin Institute on Inequality and Democracy, the Society of Women Geographers Pruitt Dissertation Fellowship, and a summer graduate student research grant from the Latin American Institute. That was last summer or the summer before?
Yeah,
last summer. She's the author of Chinese Capitalism in the Amazon, co-published by nonprofit Bobomade and the Universidad Mayor de San Andrés in La Paz. Her work has also appeared in Gender, Place, and Culture, Antiquity Online, the NACLA Report on the Americas, and more recently, the Companion to Cultural and Social Geography. Her research is in the Bolivian Amazon. And one thing I think is really cool about her work, right, is in addition to its very strong academic credentials as scholarship, she also enjoys a really strong collaborative relationship with the indigenous communities that she works among. And, it's really, I think her research is really a model for community engaged scholarship for how to do that right. She works with, in all of her work, foregrounds the knowledge of systems and relationalities that sustain life in the rainforest. Her research examines the intricate relationships between indigenous communities, the Bolivian state, and large-scale infrastructure projects of transnational interest anchored in the Amazon. So as a historian, I have to talk about how cool her sources are. She is engaged with territorial poetry, memoryscapes, letter writing, cooking recipes, affective body mapping, ancestral medicinal syrup preparation, soundscapes, and a lot more as she gathered the sources for her research. So without further ado, please welcome Noelle Guzman.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Pitts, for such a generous introduction. And thank you also to the Latin American Institute for the kind invitation to share some of the work I carried out in the Bolivian Amazon in 2019. It's truly an honor for me to have your attention and time here today, especially as I will be speaking about an area of the rainforest that, after nearly a decade of learning with and from it, has profoundly shaped how I exist and how I move through the world, offering me really an alternative, a second home, far from the cold, snowy volcanoes that raised me. In this talk, at least the second half of it, we will be guided by the girls of the Santana de Muceruna community, located in the multi-ethnic indigenous territory team in Beni, Bolivia. They will be taking us through their homes, their rivers, their tacos or cultivated fields, and through the sorrows and pain that surfaced during the construction of a highway by a Chinese company across their territory in 2019. The title of my presentation is Me Duele el Río, The River Hurts Me, Enfleshing Territory, Body Mapping, and the Affective Geographies of Chinese Infrastructure in Bolivia's Amazonia. Thank you again, everyone, for being here and for listening. And now, with the sound of the community drum, the drum that's used to call people into collective deliberation, I want to start the conversation and the presentation in the hope that we can return to that same spirit and open a conversation together at the end. Today's presentation will unfold in three parts. First, I will lay out the context for this case study, situating China and the Santana de Muceruna community, as well as explaining where this inquiry comes from. Second, I'll turn to the question of knowledge, or more specifically, learning how to know, where I'll talk about the research experience. In this section, we will walk through not only what we know or what I've learned through this process, but how I came to know it, right? Speaking about the processes that shaped this research. And third, we will be going over Andares and interpreting, where I'll analyze the maps and data produced and ask what might collaboration look like if we are committed to research that is just. What does co-interpretation actually produce analytically, ethically, and politically? And what becomes possible when meaning is made together rather than extracted? So let's get started. To begin, I want to take you to the Santana de Muceruna community, historically home of the Movima people, one of the 5 indigenous nations that make up the multi-ethnic indigenous territory team, or alongside the Mujeño Ignaciano, Mujeño Trinitario, Yuracare, and Chimane peoples. Here in yellow, you can also see the highway that I will be talking about over the course of this presentation. The area that you see here, also known as the Gran Mojos, specifically here in light blue, is one of the regions in Bolivia with the highest concentration of indigenous communities. Across the territories surrounding the highway corridor, there are close to 150 communities from different indigenous nations, including some classified as being in initial contact or initial or recent contact, such as the Chimán. It is here, along what is now known as the San Ignacio-San Borja Highway, that a Chinese company established operations to build a road designated as a project of national priority. This highway was meant to connect the Andes and the Amazon, particularly benefiting cattle ranching and agribusiness elites seeking to open new frontiers into the forest and close as much as possible the gap toward the Brazilian border and its markets. When I began my research in early 2016, the communities along the corridor shared 2 things in common. First, none of them had been consulted about the project. And second, the early waves of construction activity were already making people sick, polluting and drying up the water sources and rivers, and driving away the animals and families that rely on these livelihoods. At the time, most of the people I spoke with told me that they first realized a highway was going to be built when trucks from the Bolivian Highway Administration, or ABC, began passing through the area, taking basic measurements along what until then was a narrow dirt road surrounded by very tall trees. It didn't take long before those same trees began to fall. Soon, buses arrived carrying hundreds of workers brought directly from China for the construction work, and dump trucks and bulldozers quickly dominated the landscape. When community members raised questions or voiced their concerns, they often encountered the same response. There's no translator yet, nothing can be done. Amid unanswered questions and an increasingly guarded approach to information about China-Bolivia ties, especially as the government announced new commercial agreements and larger credit lines, the media quickly filled with alarming reports. Chinese companies across the country were facing repeated accusations of very serious labor violations and abuses involving both Chinese and Bolivian workers, as well as reports linked to wildlife trafficking. In Amazonian communities, people described seeing Chinese workers handcuffed to one another, as we can see in the picture here, and at times restrained to trees under intense heat during shifts that could stretch into the early hours of the morning. These accounts were widely interpreted as evidence of forced labor and enslavement, with some suggesting that the workers may have been transferred from detention centers in China. Bolivian workers for their part, reported violent treatment by Chinese supervisors when they asked for breaks. Testimonies include attempted strangulation, severe head injuries inflicted by supervisors, an incident in which a Chinese worker repeatedly tried to run over workers with a tractor during their lunch break, and another in which a worker suffered burns of his neck and shoulder after being doused with boiling water by his supervisor. This banner that we have here reads, "Stop the physical and psychological aggressions by Chinese business owners. We demand respect for Bolivian workers." These reports were accompanied by broader complaints, generally talking about the lack of adequate food, unpaid wages, and extremely precarious living conditions in the campsites. The trafficking of jaguar fangs and pelts, which remains a persistent problem in the Bolivian Amazon, also exposed emerging trade networks that, according to the 2019 IUCN report, were directly linked to Chinese workers involved in infrastructure projects. Some of the Chinese nationals investigated for these crimes against nature, which in Bolivia is legally recognized as a rights-bearing subject, explained the hunting and trade as connected to Asian traditional medicine. These explanations contributed to a growing wave of xenophobic sentiment among the broader population, a problem that only exacerbated later during the COVID-19 pandemic. Less often discussed, however, is how these very same dynamics also led to the criminalization of local community members who were at times drawn into or accused to be part of these networks. In these photos or pictures, you can see how envelopes and the interiors of stuffed toys were used to ship fangs through the Bolivian mail system. We can see also how jaguar pelts were transformed into hats and wallets, and how dragons and other Chinese motifs were attached to the fangs, presumably to use them as accessories. Taken together, labor abuses, wildlife trafficking, and the tensions surrounding both reveal how China's presence was experienced through multiple embodied forms of violence, of workers' bodies, the dismemberment of animal bodies, and strikingly, the relative absence of attention to women's bodies in the available accounts. The dynamics I've just described, however, are not unique to Santana de Muceruna. Similar and sometimes nearly identical patterns can be found across many indigenous communities, not only in the Bolivian Amazon, but throughout the region. This is particularly true in countries such as Ecuador and Peru, which are among the main recipients of Chinese infrastructure loans and credits in Latin America, and also farther north in places like Mexico, as China is today Latin America's main trading partner. In Bolivia, research centers such as the Centro de Estudios para el Desarrollo Laboral y Agrario, CEDLA, have documented the wide reach and use of Chinese capital from mining projects to technology transfers and even military equipment. Among these sectors, however, infrastructure has stood out as a central national priority. While there is no doubt that the traditional Western lenders and financial institutions such as the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, CAF, continue to dominate Bolivia's financial landscape, we still have data, according to the Bolivian Highway Administration, that points that since 2016, China has become one of its primary sources of financing, reaching its first place in 2018 with 35% of the total approved budget. Adriana Zapata, a researcher affiliated to the Mexican Research Center Sechimex, notes that by 2020, infrastructure had become the single most significant destination of Chinese financing in Bolivia, accounting for more than 51% of total loans and credits. Promoted under the banner of national integration, road projects, bridges, and large hydroelectric dams advanced very rapidly across the country, often located in indigenous territories. The two projects that you see highlighted here in red have drawn significant attention precisely due to the labor and environmental and indigenous conflicts that I explained before. These projects are the Rositas, a hydroelectric power plant, and the Runavaque River Alta Highway, where I also conducted research. Across the region, infrastructure has now become a central focus for Chinese contractors who not long ago were concentrated primarily in the energy sector. And well, access to up-to-date data on Bolivia remains very limited today. Aside from a few visible cases, such as the lithium-related development projects pursued by China that you can see here on the screen. But still, what we do know is that China's engagement with the region continues to expand, both in long-standing extractive sectors such as mining, industrial agriculture, and increasingly beef production, which shape much of the material relationships with China. And in the growing demand for the so-called green transition minerals tied to global energy shifts. In the case of beef, Bolivia has exported to China since 2019, following agreements negotiated under then President Evo Morales. The current administration, led by right-wing President Rodrigo Paz, who was elected in October last year, has recently suggested it might reevaluate commercial relationships with China, potentially suspending beef exports. Yet this situation, of course, remains fluid and contested, especially since cattle ranching elites retain a very strong political influence and the direction of policy is far from settled. In fact, just a few days ago, Bolivia used Peru's Chancay port for the first time to export beef to China, signaling continued interest in expanding trade routes. This port, which signed an agreement 5 years ago with the Chinese giant COSCO Shipping Ports, has generated significant concern in the United States, as it's expected to become China's main logistical hub in South America. Similar dynamics are visible elsewhere in the region, especially as the Boston University's Global Development Policy Center points out, when they highlight that Brazil has signed a few agreements recently with China aimed at reducing agriculture-driven deforestation, which include the Soya China initiative, which promotes traceability and certification for deforestation-free soy for the Chinese market. Together, all of these measures that I've presented so far are framed as commitments to South-South cooperation, anti-imperialism, and to promote a more sustainable supply chains. Okay, and now that I have shown you some of the context in which this work is situated, I'd like to return to the community scale to take a closer look at this case study and the fieldwork process that yielded this research. Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, the Santana de Muceruna community is analytically generative for understanding these broader dynamics because, as we will see, many of them condense and anchor in this land. The map on the screen, then, reflects a perspective of those who view this territory not as a lived space, but as a kind of tabula rasa, a green expanse imagined to be or imagined as available to become whatever local elites, the Bolivian state, or a Chinese company envision it to be. And yet, this very same map also claims to be the map of the girl's home. Only its vantage point is from above, outside, and from very, very far away. For the girls I work with, however, this map feels unrecognizable and unfamiliar, because it erases and silences many aspects that are fundamental to life in, with, and off this land. For example, it erases their stories, the girls' desires, their needs, and crucially, the very existence of their bodies and those of their community. When we look critically at this kind of map, we can see that it offers a representation that is timeless, decontextualized, static, and disembodied. A view that could appear neutral, but is not anything but. In doing so, it invites us to ask what and who is missing. Questions of that sort remind us of the importance of researching with our feet on the ground, focusing on the web of relationships that make up communal spaces like those of the girls, textures that simply cannot be seen from bird's eye perspectives like that we see on the screen. Only by moving a little closer do we begin to see what is actually happening there and why it matters. Over the past decade, my friends and collaborators have shown me that the methods I was relying on, including the semi-structured interviews I was conducting to understand what was happening in their territory, were simply not enough to fully grasp their experiences. In the many conversations shared with women and girls, I began to notice that some things could not easily be named or even put into words. Se le nota en los ojos, you can see it in her eyes, is the kind of phrase that I heard often when people, and especially women, spoke about their encounters with the recently established Chinese company in their territory. De solo verlos se me eriza la piel. Just seeing them gives me goosebumps or makes my skin prickle. And other comments of this nature pointed to an experience that was shared, layered, and inseparable. Something that could not be reduced to external, material, or supposedly disembodied economic dynamics. Clearly, the task seemed to be to learn how to feel. But how can we interrogate that relationality that the girls and women spoke about when most geographical and mapping methods are built upon homogenizing assumptions about the subjects, spaces, places, scales, and meanings that organize territoriality? Reflecting on these limitations and betting on the possibility of a feminist, anti-colonial, community-centered, and liberatory academic grammar, I asked the following question. What comes into view when words are decentered in order to understand the affective yet tangible forces woven through Santana's women and girls' bodies and territory? And critically, how can this tell the story of the ongoing reconfiguration of the team? This and through close dialogue with my maestras and collaborators is how I came to encounter indigenous feminisms and their many theorists, women who had already been weaving their ideas and practices throughout Latin America, challenging colonial and patriarchal structures with visions deeply rooted in their territories, memories, and ancestral knowledges. Here, I wanted to show you just a few of the many faces of Latin American indigenous feminist thinkers who have been true teachers to me. While I won't have time to do justice to each of their contributions, I do want to make their presence visible, as they are women who have taught me the importance of weaving conceptual lineages to open new paths in these directions. Moira Millán, Mapuche, from Argentina, has proposed concepts such as terricidio or terricide to name the destruction of the earth, and has also called for the cultivation of ancestral arts of living with and on the land. Berta Cáceres, Lenca, from Honduras, whose murder remains in impunity, devoted her life to defending and restoring the historical relationships of her people with rivers, mountains, and forests, and also drawing connections between the defense of these territories from corporate exploitation and the defense of women's bodies from the violence that comes with it. Anastasia Candré, daughter of the Huitoto and Ocaina peoples, writing just one generation after the rubber boom atrocities took place in La Chorrera, Colombia, left behind an extraordinary legacy of visual art, poetry, and songs, works that speak to the vitality of memory and to indigenous sciences carried, nurtured, and transmitted by Amazonian women. Nina Walinga has been at the forefront, Quechua, has been at the forefront of the struggle against violence against women, indigenous women, making this a central element of the Summa Causa framework of Vivir Bien, or living well, and to open legal pathways toward justice and repair that have historically been closed for indigenous women. Finally, Paulina Nosa and Victoria Inchu. Victoria Inchu is an elder from the Mojeño Trinitario Nation, from the team, the territory where I work. And she has fiercely stood up against ancestral patriarchies. And Paulina Nosa, who you see here, also from the Mojeño Trinitario Nation, who is a long-time mentor of mine, reminds everyone in communal gatherings and through her practice that the revitalization of ancestral memory around bodily healing is inseparable from the healing of the planet. Through all their conceptualizations lies the relationality of life, a notion that in some contexts is understood as land kinship. This means recognizing certain beings, such as water, mountains, plants, or animals, as relatives, as kin from whom we descend and with whom we maintain relationships of reciprocity, collaboration, respect, and care. Latin American indigenous feminisms dialogue closely with Native feminisms across the hemisphere, of course, reaching here in the North, and put forth an understanding of life as a woven fabric of interconnections where everything is related and enmeshed. From this standpoint, indigenous feminisms challenge the very subject of white, Western, or hegemonic feminisms, shifting the focus from the individual to territory and all its relations as the primary locus of life and of feminist politics. In doing so, indigenous feminisms open fascinating possibilities for reimagining what geography looks like, is, and does when it integrates more than human worlds and is oriented toward care. The everyday experiences and comments that I shared just a few minutes ago, shared by my collaborators, resonated strongly with Lorena Cabnal's theorization of cuerpo territorio, body territory. Lorena Cabnal, Maya Shinka, as much as Adriana Guzman, have taught us that capitalist processes are never race or gender neutral. From this standpoint, I return to Cabnal's concept of cuerpo territorio, written as a single term to emphasize its meaning as an indivisible unit, or what I think of as an amalgamation. In Cabnal's words, the historical and oppressive violence exists for both my first territory, the body, as well as for my historical territory, the land. If we take this seriously, then attending to indigenous women and girls' spatialities, the places they inhabit or avoid, and the ways they move through them allows us to understand the production of space as something far more than a point on a graph. And taking this perspective into consideration opens up spaces that carry with it ways of being in the world. Understanding cuerpo territorio, or that cuerpo territorio intimately ties the physicality of the land, the tangible marks of the colonial, capitalist, patriarchal practice of empires, and the most sensitive fibers of our bodies, I invited my collaborators to map. This was a form of enacting and taking seriously what it means to engage with indigenous communities, not only as subjects to be analyzed, but also as producers of theoretical knowledge. The considerations I just mentioned, however, might not initially seem directly related to mapping practices to everyone. However, for those whose lives and ways of being in the world are deeply influenced by territorial dynamics, integrating these aspects is fundamental, crucial. It is thus essential to remember what human geographer Dennis Cosgrove emphasizes. To map is in one way or another to take measure of a world, and more than merely take it, to figure the measure so taken in such a way that it might be communicated between people, places, or times. The measure of mapping is not restricted to the mathematical. It may equally be spiritual, political, or moral. By the same token, the mapping's record is not confined to the archival. It includes the remembered, the imagined, the contemplated. And now to draw a map of the dynamics I was trying to make sense, I recalled anthropologist Nancy Shepherd Hughes' words, which guided me in this largely uncharted terrain in geography. She states that seeing, listening, touching, recording can be, if done with care and sensitivity, acts of fraternity and of sisterhood, acts of solidarity. Above all, they are the work of recognition. Not to look, not to touch, not to record can be the hostile act, the act of indifference and of turning away. But well, I feel like I have now covered a lot of the theoretical components that went into this project, and I want to now take you through the protocols I employed in the process and the prompts that were used to evoke the mapped features that are coming. I proposed 5 main questions to my collaborators who participated in the body mapping workshop, which, by the way, lasted about a little bit over 4 hours, and incorporated their edits and comments and suggestions before the actual workshop. While I won't be able to go through each instruction in detail, I did want to show what the protocol and mention that the protocol involved these 5 main stages and was guided by prompts invited participants to draw their bodies and what they carry, mapping lived spaces and how they inhabit them, marking tensions, feelings, and desires they experience, interpreting and reflecting on what the body reveals, and finally, a collective reading of these embodied maps. So after introducing the topic, after the communal authorities, of course, welcomed everyone into the space, I posed a little bit more complex version of these questions, but the questions were, what does my body hold? What are the important spaces I inhabit? Where do I feel it? What hurts or needs change? And what do our bodies say when read together? And okay, now having covered that, I think we can move to the analysis, the third and final part of this presentation, which I call Andares and Interpreting. Andares is walking. Here we have 3 of the maps drawn by 15 girls in 2019 in Santana de Museluna, which are the center of this analysis. Their narrations, as you will see in a second, pointed to several directions with commonalities and divergences, which have been organized in these 3 categories. The first category is hope and dreams. The second one is fear, and the third one is violence, damage, and pain. As their names suggest, these 3 categories map the girls' affective geographies, each shaped by distinct gut feelings connected to particular spaces. Let's go over the first categorization, hope and dreams. For this section, I noticed that the girls had emphasized 3 critical areas: family and home, common spaces such as the school, the cabildo or town hall, the field or cancha de fútbol, among others, and nature. The hearts you see here on the screen represent places where the girls feel joy, love, and safety toward their families, neighbors, forests, and animals. They have pointed out that their throats let them know when they're happy, that they feel joy in their legs when running and playing soccer, in their hands when touching and doing things, and in their heads and ears with dreams, ideas, and songs. For instance, one of the maps showcases a house in the heart area with the words, "With my family, I feel safe." We see that here. Another map mentions Santana's families being united, kind, and respectful. And similarly, we also notice the presence of the school here, central to this map. And this is a particularly significant site for this case study, as the community associates it with the company's presence and with what the road has made possible, something that the vast majority of community members feel would have been unthinkable without the company. For the girls, the school is a place of growth, joy, and pride. In another area, we see the affection they hold for the cabildo, which I think is, here, for the cabildo. or town hall, the physical space where community deliberation and decision making take place, and where the girls imagine themselves one day leading their communities. Similarly, in one of the maps, a girl expresses her aspiration to become a teacher, placing this dream on her forehead. By examining bodies in and as spaces, the girls reveal with quiet but powerful clarity their agency in naming what matters to them, even when doing so means subverting the perimeters and normative geographies set by those in power. The girls locate their okay. Now, looking into the fears category, we can see that the girls locate fear in their hands, near their legs, and in their stomachs and hips. When asked to elaborate, they mentioned fears such as staying home alone or drowning in the river. They also depict the highway and trucks quite centrally. In one of the maps, we can see that a truck appears between the stomach and the genitals, and is accompanied by a striking warning label that reads "peligro," danger. That'll be here. Another girl, in another map, we see a girl standing alone at one end of the highway with her house at the other, a place also named as a site of fear and pain, that would be here. In their explanations, the girls emphasized another crucial element, the troubling behavior of some workers. They described shouts, intimidating laughter and whistling, objectifying gestures, sexual jokes, and other forms of harassment. These encounters contribute significantly to the fearful landscape they describe, one that largely revolves around the highway and its workers. At the same time, their accounts invite us to sit with the ambiguity of this space. The highway emerges both as a site of opportunity, enabling access, for example, to the school, and also as a site of fear. Another location associated with fear is the cantina, which you can see here, where workers gathered on weekends to drink, a dynamic that repeatedly generated extreme stress for women, and on more than one occasion led to trucks crashing into their homes in the middle of the night. As we can see, for Santana's women and girls, the company's presence is experienced as predatory both in their body and across their territory. Now we're moving to the last category, violence, damage, and pain. And we can see that through the body mapping process, which was understood as a shared reflective space, the girls collectively named experiences of pain and violence that they would not usually discuss with friends, at school, or at home. Their affective geographies thus reveal how and where their embodied spatial lives become painful. Pain, harm, and violence are represented through band-aids placed on the maps. The girls mark their hands, arms, hearts and chests, genitals, and faces also, as well as animals, as sites where different forms of suffering are felt. They associated these pains with negative thoughts, difficult memories, school pressures, daily chores, and family or communal tensions. They spoke of feeling both pain and shame in their cheeks, the cheeks where sometimes their parents would strike them if they behaved in a disrespectful way. One map, for example, reads, "There are things we need to heal at home." In these moments, the girls shift attention away from the highway and the company, directing it inward to the violences embedded in everyday domestic life. The interlocking nature of violence becomes visible in the girls' maps. They show us that violence is not only something external, but relational and internal as well, calling us to examine how it is produced and reproduced within the community itself. The band-aids placed on nature further extend this relational geography of harm. Across the maps, the river is consistently depicted as a wounded site. In one drawing, the word sanar, or to heal, which you can see here, and we can also see in different animals, we can see the cow here with a band-aid, and also the ducks and the river is also here. Well, I can't really do that, but you can see it. It's been marked. Nature has been marked as a wounded site. The word sanar, to heal, is written across it. The river, which is celebrated for its strength and for connecting families, is understood as damaged by pollution largely attributed to the company. This contamination is linked to the deaths of animals that live in or depend on the river, while the girls and their families are also present on these rivers and continue to rely on it for transport and fishing. We can see that here and over there as well. Another map reads, "Do not cut trees." The girls explain that road construction has felled many trees and that they wish trees to be treated with kindness and respect. They connect the loss of trees to the deaths of animals along the highway, recounting how company trucks often failed to stop for snakes, capybara families, dogs, turtles, foxes, and other animals that once moved freely around the area. These deaths and harms, reflected in their desire to heal the polluted river, causing harm to fish and driving animals away, extend to ducks, chickens, pigs, and cows, also depicted on the maps. The presence of band-aids on nature poignantly illustrates how bodily and territorial suffering are inseparable and amalgamated, offering a powerful window into the intertwined affective processes linking cuerpo and territorio. And well, as we near the conclusion of this presentation, I would like to share just a few additional insights regarding the lessons I've gleaned about research as a space of contention during my time working with the team. One fundamental realization has been that the research process itself must be a subject of analysis, co-interpretation, and negotiation. In this particular case study, the images on this slide illustrate the outcome of one such negotiation. Towards the conclusion of the body mapping workshop, a girl raised an unexpected question. Where will these maps be displayed? When I responded saying that the maps weren't intended for public display and were meant for the community itself, the girls expressed huge disappointment and their desire to show them somewhere else. Reflecting on this moment, a few months later, we organized an art gallery exhibit in La Paz, Bolivia, where the girls' maps were exhibited for a few weeks, providing the recognition they desired to have. Unfortunately, due to travel constraints at their ages, they are 6 to 12 years old, they weren't able to inaugurate the exhibit themselves. Though, of course, we took measures to ensure their concerns, names, and intentions were acknowledged and addressed. And so we have arrived at the end of this presentation, and I hope the case I have shared today has offered you, as it has offered me, a small window into how the geopolitical dynamics that are far more visible today than in 2019 here in the US unfold across various and different scales in really tangible ways in other latitudes. At a time of reconfiguration of the world order, when the sovereignty of Latin American nation states is being tested by renewed hemispheric ambitions and an intensification of threats associated with the brand new Dawn Road Doctrine, it becomes crucial to recognize how these dynamics leave profound marks, not only ecologically speaking, but also on the intimate, affective, and embodied dimensions of life. For me, one of the most important lessons from this process has been to visualize, that is to literally make graphic, how territorial relationality becomes embodied, something that is often transmitted through oral histories or lived through everyday experiences and practices. I came to understand, crucially, that where and how happiness, fear, dreams, and violence are felt is not separate from space, but rather constitutive of it. And that insight, I think, invites us all to rethink the theoretical and methodological frameworks from which we try to make sense of the social realities we are a part of. Through these maps, the girls have painted an accurate portrait of ecological change, labor abuses and violence, narratives that unsettle dominant portrayals of them as either passive victims or selfless fighters, or uncomplicated beneficiaries of development projects. The embodied dimension captured in these drawings, moving beyond binaries like outside and inside, material and subjective, or emotional and rational, allows us to grasp Camnal's notion of cuerpo territorio with intimate clarity. Today, I am carrying these lessons forward into my doctoral dissertation. While I'm focusing on a completely different topic, really, it definitely builds directly on the processes I've shared with you today. The team, the territory I work with, and I've been working with for a decade, is now the first autonomous indigenous Amazonian territory in Bolivia with its own government, and which is a development that was made even more urgent by the experiences of dispossession and abuse that communities faced in relation to the company and the highway, among other pressures. In my current work, I continue to think with the framework of cuerpo territorio, this time exploring how forest plants act within the body to heal, and how these practices generate powerful spaces of autonomy, spaces that don't need state funding, hospital construction, institutional recognition, and don't ask for permission of anybody to be enacted. I hope that in the not too distant future, I have another opportunity to share that work with you and to show you how the territorial relationalities that the girls speak of here are not only ways of understanding and relating to the world, but also constitute very effective strategies of territorial governance. So yeah, thank you so much. And if anyone is wondering where to find sources for this work, you can scan this QR code. Thank you.
Thank you, Noelle.